Thank you, Angela. And again, do apologize on my end for the commotion. So to kick us off, I'm going to turn to Mary and ask about what some of the challenges are that cities are facing with regard to climate.
Thank you so much, Chloe. The incidence and the scale of natural disasters triggered by climate change has risen sharply on a global basis since record keeping began in 1980. We averaged 400 of these events. Think hurricanes and other storms, landslides, wildfires, and floods. We averaged 400 of them annually between 1980 and the year 2000. But since then, acceleration is the only word to use to describe this. 800 such events in 2017 alone. And in 2020, even the pandemic couldn't keep climate change and natural disasters off the front page, with record wildfires in Australia and the Pacific Northwest. And those fires burned longer and across wider geographies than ever before. And there were more named storms in the Atlantic hurricane season than the English alphabet could accommodate. These more regular and more intense natural disasters are occurring as the globe warms. Earth's average temperature rose 1 degree Celsius between 1900 and 1980. Now it's increasing at a rate of 0.2 of a degree every 10 years. The outcome of this is wilder weather. Many of you might have heard that we shouldn't call it global warming. How about global weirding? And that makes events like Texas's deep freeze all the way down to the Rio Grande a higher probability event. While some of these events strike unpopulated areas, most affect cities. Let's use Houston as an example. This poor beleaguered city has had 500-year floods in the 5 years between 2015 and 2019, culminating with the disastrous Hurricane Harvey. Climate change means cities have to contend with more intense and more regular threats to their populations, damage to their infrastructure, and in some instances, threats to their very existence. As we speak, Indonesia is figuring out how to move its capital, Jakarta, to higher ground. And of course, inundation in many areas is going to push more cities into, more people into cities globally. We know that the world's great cities will be defended, but it's a costly process. Angela's spent time in New York. New York City has 533 miles of coastline to defend. That puts Chicago's lakefront erosion issues in an interesting context. To date, we haven't observed that climate change and climate risk have changed investment behaviors. That's where I intersect with climate change. My firm invests in real estate on behalf of state pension plans, for example. Pre-pandemic, cities facing enormous climate risks like New York, Boston, London, and Tokyo still dominated global investment patterns. This is because these cities remain key employment centers, key elements, as Chicago does, of how business gets done globally. Florida and Texas are still seeing population growth given their warmer winters and the perception of lower taxes. But we see this as likely to change at some point as insurance becomes more costly or becomes unattainable. And as people grow weary of daily annoyances like sunny day flooding, which is now chronic on much of the East Coast of the United States, or those periodic and really scary events like hurricanes as they become more regular. I would argue that Chicago is in a position to be a climate winner over the long term, particularly given our access to fresh water from the Great Lakes. Lake Michigan alone represents the 6th largest body of fresh water in the world. We need to take care of this resource, and we need to take care of our natural aquifers that are being depleted across the region. Chicago also doesn't have to contend with hurricane or to storm surge to the extent some cities on oceans have to. And then finally, we have transit, a precious resource that other cities like Denver and Phoenix are spending billions of dollars to build. Transit's not had a heyday during the pandemic, but it will be an extremely important resource we must invest in going forward. So with that, I'll turn it back to Chloe.
Thank you so much, Mary. So noting, that really important role that climate is taking and risks about climate are taking in investments and those decisions, let's turn to Francesca for an example of a real international investment, the McDonald's headquarters. What was the process that you used behind deciding to locate McDonald's in Chicago, and what were some of your priorities?
Thanks, Chloe, and thanks for having me here on this session today. So for McDonald's, actually moving to Chicago was kind of moving back home. So our first headquarters were in Chicago, and then we moved out to the suburbs many years ago and moved back a few years ago. So it was our homecoming. And at the time, 3-4 years ago, we were really looking at how do we reinvent ourselves? How do we become more modern? How do we innovate our business? And we felt the energy of a city like Chicago really matched the energy that our brand was looking for at the time. So we moved back home. And I would say the main reason for the move was to have access to a greater pool of talent. We quite frankly weren't getting the number of applicants for jobs in the suburbs. A lot of people didn't want to work in the far suburbs. So when we moved into the city, we moved into a brand new building. We've got open spaces, so it really encourages collaboration and innovation. We set it up with the right technology, so all the rooms are WebEx enabled, et cetera. And during COVID, clearly getting all of our team ready for that kind of environment was just really fortunate because we were able to utilize that during COVID. And I think it also helped us better connect with our customers because when we were out in the suburbs, we were on a campus, which was like a bubble. And now it's, you just have the vibrancy of the city. And Mary mentioned transit. Transit was also a factor for us. If you haven't read it yet, I suggest everyone on the line read MPC's Transit Means Business report. We had a business case there, and we really felt that being close to transit gave us access to an expanded labor pool, right? People could come from further away, and that is absolutely proven to be true. In our headquarters in the city, or in the suburbs, when we were in the suburbs before, everyone drove to work because there really, quite frankly, was no other option. Now we're in the city with 2,000 employees, and 90% of our team takes public transport to the new office. So that, that clearly also helped reduce our footprint. So when we think about the sustainability aspects, which you asked about, those were also important to us. And we've got quite a few sustainability initiatives that we work with the city on and other external experts to support us. First and probably most importantly for us was we were in the suburbs in a LEED Platinum certified building. And I personally said, we're not going to move from LEED Platinum to anything less than LEED Platinum. And I think that's really important when cities think about infrastructure. You don't often make new buildings or change out all of the AC and heating and lighting and everything. So setting that infrastructure up right from the beginning was important. And we do, even though we don't own the building, we used our size and scale to ensure that the building we moved into was LEED Platinum certified. So that was really important to us. And a lot of things that go along with that. So, waste sorting, composting. Like we have a small underground garage. We do have electric chargers and electric car chargers in the garage, which is helpful for me as I drive an electric car. We've got a beautiful green rooftop, which is developed by a local woman-owned organization in the West Loop. We've got native plants up there, which help purify the air. So there were a lot of pieces of sustainability initiatives that we wanted to get right from the time we started with our building there. So thanks for that.
Great. Yeah, thank you for giving us that insight into what's really important for you all in making that decision. We also know that those really important, impactful partnerships and local leadership was a really big part of your decision. So on that thread, turning to Angela, we'd love to hear more about how the city of Chicago is approaching climate action. What are we benchmarking? How are we setting rules and regulations? How are we fostering those partnerships?
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. And I will just begin and want to thank Mary for that framing in the beginning. I think it's so important just to really underscore the urgency and the crisis that we're in, and just really appreciate that context. And, you know, here in Chicago, we have a long history of setting and pursuing ambitious climate goals. You know, that began first in 2008 when the city released its climate action plan. And that plan outlined a series of goals and action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 80% below the 1990 levels by the year 2050. And it also had an interim goal of reducing emissions by 25% by the year 2020. That level of commitment carried through 2017. At that time, the city aligned with the Paris Climate Agreement and joined other cities globally in committing to greenhouse gas emissions to levels equivalent or greater to than 26 to 28% by 2025. And then more recently in 2019, right at the tail end of the last administration, the city committed to powering all municipal buildings with 100% renewable by 2025 and achieving 100% renewable energy citywide by 2035, which is very exciting. And so that happened at the tail end of the last administration. And I think for us, you know, really stepping into these new roles and under the leadership of Mayor Lightfoot, it was important for us to really uphold these commitments, right? And also at the same time to determine how the city of Chicago can set new goals to rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so there is some preliminary climate action planning that's happening on our end. We've begun with just scenario analysis and planning and really reviewing our benchmarks. We use you know, a greenhouse gas inventory. We have one for 2005, 2010, 2015, and 2017. And we use that really to understand how we're doing. And to determine where our largest sources of emissions are and what sectors. And we've also thoroughly reviewed just hundreds of recommendations that have come out of other plans, right? At the very end of the last administration, we saw Sustain Chicago, which was a tremendous effort to convene stakeholders to talk about resiliency efforts. We don't want to lose all of that really important content, right? So for us, it's going through some of those recommendations to see which ones are viable and are aligned with where we need to be, the level of ambition that we need to be for the future. And so, you know, we're preparing this preliminary analysis to really think about how we, and we'll be taking this public, right? So that we can share with our stakeholders and meaningfully connect with people, residents and people in our communities and our business leaders and our small business owners and folks in other sectors to really understand like how the climate crisis has impacted your homes, right? Your business, your neighborhood, and how we can shift toward new investments in renewable energy, right? Energy efficiency, green infrastructure, so that we can help transform people's lives and their communities. And I think one more thing that I would just like to mention, because I think it's so important for us to really frame this within the moment that we're in now, right? We are still in the midst of a global pandemic. We are at a moment where we are seeing deep and systemic racial inequities finally exposed, right? And we're grappling with that. We're seeing the downturn of many economic sectors. And I think, you know, we feel the urgency, and at the same time, we have to be thinking about how we are planning more justly and more equitably, right? And I think that there are a number of strategies that the city has to employ while we're advancing our climate work here. We have to confront the most profound environmental challenges in the city. There are still a number of ongoing pollution issues that we have to grapple with and confront. We have to think about how we center this work on equity and acknowledging that there are communities that have been historically underserved and overburdened, and that this is an opportunity for us to really lift up leaders on the front lines and think about what just transition looks like for our communities. We know that the transportation and the building sector primarily are the two sectors that have the largest sources of our emissions in the city of Chicago. And as we're thinking about that more equitable approach, it's important to really understand where we can rapidly reduce emissions in those two sectors. And I think the final thing is that we have to think about inclusive economic growth, right? Beyond just the interventions that we see, the new technologies that we want to introduce, or just the existing technologies that we know can tackle this crisis. Where are there opportunities for wealth generation, economic growth, right? Economic development, workforce development. There's a whole host of community benefits that can be coupled with these investments, and really thinking thoughtfully about what that whole ecosystem is really important for us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Angela. In thinking about, that broader ecosystem, I want to open the next question up to all three of our panelists to talk about what else Chicago can do to continue to move climate goals forward, both locally, of course, here in Chicago, but as partners and part of that regional and global ecosystem.
I'll kick off this one, Chloe, because I think what Angela said, I wrote down a note. She said, determining where our largest impacts are first. And I think that's so critical, and it really struck with me because we had to do the same thing at McDonald's, right? Figure out where our largest impacts are. And, people think of McDonald's as a beef company, and we are one of the largest beef purchasers in the world. We actually are number one in volume, but we still only buy less than 2% of global supply of beef. So, Chicago is a big city, but it's, we're in a global ecosystem. And I think that the similarities are we have to partner with others. Like, collaboration is critical. Large companies and cities, neither one of us can do this work alone. So to me, at all levels, whether it's regional, local, or global, as you mentioned, Chloe, we have to create partnerships to maximize the impact that we make. And so, things like this that we do, other organizations that we're part of are really important. And we've done that with a lot of cities, in Chicago, but, on other areas where, our biggest impacts are beef, for example. Alberta, Canada is one of the largest places where we have ranching for North America. It's a large beef producing region. We partnered there with the government in Alberta to talk about, how can we work together with the government, with ranchers, to make sure that we set up a sustainable beef production that would be meaningful for our customers as well as agricultural departments and the city, and worked with different provinces as well there. And by doing that, we were able to create a certification for sustainable beef for Canada. So there are really exciting collaborations. Even globally, we did the same thing in France with recycling. We worked locally with the city mayors in France to have our local owner operators, because we are in 36,000 locations around the world, and most of our restaurants are owned by local independent owner operators. They work with local governments to sign a packaging and what we call a packaging and waste charter, which allows them to get some benefits on sorting and recycling. So we're installing the garbage bins. The rest of the city has the infrastructure, and so we're ensuring that that cities are investing in infrastructure, and we're investing to ensure that waste gets to the right place. And there's just a benefit for waste management for both sides. So these are maybe a couple of small examples, but I think that these types of partnerships are really important, and they start with where Angela started, which is, finding out where the largest impacts are, and then finding people to work together with. And then I think there's some big things that we all do together too. And I know the city of Chicago is part of We're Still In. We're also part of the We're Still In initiative, WASI, as most people call it, which really showcases the leadership that we can all play, no matter who's in office, right? So, sometimes federal guidelines change. We see that with different presidents signing up to initiatives to showcase whether you're a company or a city, to say, you know, we're still part of ensuring that we meet climate goals to reduce greenhouse gases for the world was an important pledge I think many of us signed up to. So I think there's a lot that still can be done there to drive positive change.
May I jump in now, Chloe?
Please, yeah.
There is so much that can be done at this really important moment where there's a global recognition of the need to decarbonize. In my industry, the pressure is coming from our clients, which is always a great source. Risk is a great motivator. Doing good is one thing, but the risk of clients shifting to someone else because they manage a portfolio better is really quite invigorating. And so as a firm, we have committed to reducing our carbon on the portion of buildings that we operate to a net zero by 2030. And getting to that is going to involve the acceptance of on-site renewable energy. City can help there, or the state of Illinois can help there with solar grants. We're tending to focus in our portfolio on those states like New Jersey that have really attractive incentives for what it is that we need to be doing. Cities can go the punitive route like New York City is, where it is putting fines out there on building owners whose assets aren't hitting energy reduction targets, or cities can go the more carrot approach, which is incentives to promote energy reduction or to clean energy. Incentives for tenants, we can only control so much, right? Our portion of a building often may be the lobby and the common areas. We can reduce the energy there or switch it to cleaner uses, but our tenants are often the ones that are engaging in the energy emissions producing or the energy use that generates emissions. Maybe there's an incentive program that the city creates. The best tenants, something like that. McDonald's would be such a great award winner in that category. Recycling is critical. I know this city is working on trying to fix its recycling program to make it more efficient. Cities can help my industry shift from our focus on new construction to the reuse of existing buildings. And mind you, the market is going to do a lot with this as well, as we do not likely need as much retail as we have globally, and likely don't need as much office as we have globally. And so look at building codes and zoning restrictions to make certain that those buildings can be converted from one use to another without unnecessary obstacles to those conversions. And finally, I'll put two more things out there. The accessory dwelling unit ordinance that the city council passed last year is an example of thinking about the double or the triple bottom line. It simultaneously is going to help the city in achieving a creation of workforce housing, which is so important. It's an equity and social justice issue. It's going to help small landlords. It's going to help with, often these are buildings that are in great locations relative to transit. So putting people and living in a place where they can easily access transit is a big part of reducing the globe's carbon footprint. And then finally, we need to think about shifting land use patterns. Transit-oriented development remains critical. Experiments with limiting or not requiring parking at a building adjacent to a transit stop, good-o, great idea. We need to rethink zoning in suburban areas as our low density approach to the past 100 years or so promotes the reliance on cars. And Francesca may have an electric vehicle, but only 2% of the population does right now. So we've got a transition period we've got to get through, and making zoning codes smarter. Density, we need to embrace density. We need pictures of positive density to help people stop hissing individuals like me when I'm promoting an upzoning in downtown Oak Park. I'm still upset 3 years later about being hissed at the idea of recommending a 19-story building adjacent to another 19-story building. And then finally, the 15-minute or the 20-minute city concept is a gigantic one. How do we structure our neighborhoods so that people can take care of their immediate needs and get to their workplace within a 15-minute, maybe even a walkable commute? So just some ideas there.
And if I can jump in, it's really great to hear that, and just want to touch on a couple of things. Mary, just, everything that you've just laid out really assures me that we are moving in the right direction. I think that this year, we are working on a climate action framework that we will bring more publicly. And in the interim, right, we have to move toward implementation. We already have goals that we have to uphold here in the city of Chicago, and we have to both plan for the future and roll out that process while also just implementing a number of strategies that we can do now, right? And I think that we have done a couple of them. We launched a building decarbonization strategy, focusing again on buildings, the built environment, because 70% in the city of Chicago, per our greenhouse gas inventory, it tells us that 70% of our emissions comes from the built environment. And so that is a strategy that we're really proud of. And I think just to touch on, what Francesca was saying about partnerships, we have spent so much time in the past few months engaging folks from various sectors, our corporate sustainability partners, our frontline leaders in communities, our major institutions, our architects, our designers, folks that are building developers, right? Our industrial partners, workforce development organizations, tenant rights and advocacy organizations that represent renters, right, who traditionally do not have a say what happens in their buildings, low-income housing developers. So just a wide range of stakeholders that we've come together to say, hey, we have to transition. We have to prioritize energy efficiency. We have to enable on-site renewable energy generation where possible. And if that's not possible, then, finding pathways to procure off-site renewable energy generation. We have to think about minimizing or, moving away from our reliance on fossil fuels, right? And moving to more renewable sources of energy. And we know that these technologies exist now, right? We don't have to wait for something new to be invented. We can do that now. And so really just understanding, right, and fostering those relationships with folks, our stakeholders, to really understand what financing mechanisms, again, just touching on what you've already said, what financing mechanisms do you need to be successful? The city of Chicago does have a commercial PACE, but there are a number of other mechanisms that are out there that we can learn from in other cities. Understanding, what other programmatic support is necessary to make this transition, what technical assistance do people need. We've learned from cities like Washington, D.C., where they have these building hubs, right, that people can go to. It's a one-stop shop. You understand, what incentives are available. They help you with technical assistance and really help you as you transition your building. And really understanding what equity means in this space, right? What does building equity mean? How have cities played a part historically in creating such disparities in our built environment, particularly for residents? How does redlining, segregation play a role in that, right? And how do we, in this space, overcome that, right? And create outcomes that address that. And I think that those are all processes that we're going through now. We are now at the point where we've moved away from these engagement conversations and are going to be narrowing down the group of folks that we work with to get to policy development, which is really exciting. And then we'll be moving toward implementation later on this year. So we're really excited about that. This is also the year where the city is entering a new energy supply contract for the first time in a while. And there is a provision in that RFP where we are asking the respondents, or we're saying there's a provision in the RFP that says that 50% of the energy supply has to come from new build generation here in the region, right? So we're talking about just a massive solar or wind farm to power 50% of the energy supply from the city. So we don't want to just rely on rec procurement. And that's really exciting. I can't say too much more about that because that's an active procurement. But there are so many ways that we are negotiating that contract to maximize community benefits. This is also the year that our franchise agreement is up for the first time in 30 years as the city of Chicago. We have communicated to our utility partner, ComEd, that we will not enter a new agreement until we come to terms on a parallel energy and equity agreement. So really understanding where there are opportunities as we think about our infrastructure, if we're moving to renewable energy generation, if we're moving to electrification, what does the infrastructure look like that's needed to support that? How do we make sure that we are providing deep and programmatic assistance to our residents? How do we reduce energy costs, particularly for low-income customers? And how do we just work with them on deeper investments in areas of the city that have not seen the same level of investment in infrastructure historically? So there's a lot going on this side. We're really excited about what's to come in the new year for sure.
That is really exciting. So thank you, all three of you, for adding those details and giving us a picture of what this is really looking like on the ground. I know we had a question about what actions individuals and governments and nonprofits and other organizations can take, but wanted to really quickly bring in a question that I see from the audience about this kind of infrastructure and partnerships. So the question is asking, what does equitable transit-oriented development look like in this space? How is that playing into climate resiliency planning and solutions? And specifically asking both Mary and Angela, who globally is doing a really good job of making investments near transit to shift this norm from cars.
So some of the global leaders in transit access are cities like Tokyo, where transit is just woven into how people think about their commute to work, their commute to, and walking is how they think about their commute to getting basic needs. Other examples, well, I'll think of cities that are doing a great job in changing their position. They include Denver, which has decided that transit is the future in fighting against the congestion that was being generated by its massive population growth over the last couple of decades. By contrast, you've got cities like Nashville that were in a position, sadly, they had something get in the way of their ability to vote in transit. That would happen a couple of years ago. Some bad sequence of events occurred such that the voting population voted down an amendment that would have allowed, or a bond issue that would have allowed for the creation of transit. I think that's going to get Nashville in trouble at some point, as the 2-minute commute that people are moving to be able to get turns into that awful 20-minute commute or 40-minute commute, or the other dynamics that we've seen in a lot of suburban settings. As far as making it equitable, Chicago's transit system is not perfect, but it has greater reach than most systems I know of. And so encouraging development adjacent to that wonderful system that gets people to jobs pretty well is really a critical element of achieving equity in a city that sadly hasn't always had equity as its image.
Yeah, and I will just add, for us, this is about maximizing density, right? Really within a 1 mile radius of, half a mile radius of a transit stop, right? And we really want to think about how to create walkable communities and reducing reliance on cars, right? That's really what our transit-oriented development, or equitable transit-oriented development project looks like here in Chicago. And we have a pretty robust network of folks that we work with, that the mayor's office works with on equitable transit-oriented development plan. A big piece of that, yes, is supporting our public transportation infrastructure. So the CTA also has a climate goal of electrifying its buses by 2040 and really prioritizing bus lines that they want to improve air quality in these communities, right? And so there are efforts that are ongoing now. The CTA just released its first 6 electric buses on the Chicago line and has plans to move that down further onto the south side in the future as well, which is exciting and is something that we've been supportive of, especially at the federal level, right? As we are advocating through the American Recovery Plan and also the American Jobs Plan, which is coming up, right? Really advocating for how we can support public transportation, and they have been. The CTA does have their own allocation of funds to sustain the public transit system through that source of funds. So, which is exciting and something that we're supportive of. And I think that the other strategy for us, beyond just making sure that we have this thriving public transportation system, is low carbon mobility, right? So yeah, one of our best public-private partnerships in the city of Chicago is the Divvy system, right? Is our Divvy bike system. And last year we begun expansion of the Divvy bike system in communities that traditionally were not served by this system, right? And it really expanding that out to the communities on the south and west sides that didn't have docking stations, and really promoting biking in all of our communities throughout the city has been so important to us. And as you all know, we also just wrapped up our second e-scooter pilot. The first one, as you all recall, was limited to a couple of neighborhoods on the near west side. We really wanted to understand that from an equity perspective, right? What does it look like in communities throughout Chicago? And really intentionally making sure that that infrastructure, those scooters, were available to neighborhoods on the far south and southwest and west sides, right? And really understanding what that looked like. How did people use the e-scooters, and really just collecting data and understanding that experience for people, so that we can think about what the future of e-scooters are for the city of Chicago.
We have a couple of related questions, I think, to this idea about evolving as things are changing and McDonald's practices. So for Francesca, how is McDonald's evolving your business practices as both cities and consumers evolve to be interested in these ways of addressing climate change? Things like becoming interested in plant-based diet, or taking transit and other modes of transportation to your restaurants instead of driving.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. So I think there's a lot of things we're doing. The first thing we did, as Angela said, is determining where our largest impacts are, and 2/3 of our impact comes through our supply chain. 1/3 from our restaurant, and really less than 10% comes through distribution logistics. So it's kind of surprising that such a small amount comes through the transportation side. So our focus has really been on all of our agricultural products in our supply chain, and we set sustainability targets for many of our key components. So we have 100% sustainable fish, which is MSC certified. We've got sustainable coffee in all of our restaurants through Rainforest Alliance and its partnerships. I talked about the sustainable beef initiatives that we've been very focused on. We focus also on sustainable palm oil and chicken, and packaging and waste is a big part, which I talked about, just one of the examples that we're doing in France. But those are all global initiatives, and we worked very closely with the World Wildlife Fund. We really shared with them, here's where we're buying everything around the world in all 119 countries. Help us determine where our biggest impacts are, and help us set really strong goals. So all of those commodities I just mentioned were 100% meeting 100% targets by the year 2020. And on our website, you can see a lot more details there that we basically met all of those targets for 2020. So I think we feel good about that. We've done a lot in the nutrition area. Someone asked about that. If you look at, we've removed all artificial colors, flavors, and ingredients from the major categories of our food. One Happy Meal now, if you think about our youngest customers, is that each Happy Meal is less than 500 calories a day, which, if you think about a 1,500 calorie diet for a person, it matches their daily allowance of what they eat. And we're the first, and continue to be, unfortunately, the only restaurant company that set a science-based target, meeting the Science-Based Target Initiative. So still, we're the only one in our industry that's done that. So we've set the targets to meet the reduction of 1.5 degrees that's needed. So I think we've done a lot so far. We don't do a really good job talking about it for sure. We also, someone asked about plant-based. We also signed, well, maybe it was 3-4 weeks ago, a deal with Beyond Meat, which hopefully some of you saw. We've tested Beyond Meat products in Canada. We have them now in a few markets in Europe. We're committed to do a test in the US. But we do have a global partnership with Beyond Meat, which we're starting with burgers, but we're looking at things like sausage and chicken and other products, and we'll continue to look at those, and determine what customers want. But if you look at where our big impact is, it's with beef, and so our focus has been reducing water, reducing carbon emissions with beef. It's been on looking at different ways that cattle feed within a ranch, and using that and how cattle eat grass, and making that a carbon sink by just really having cattle being able to move around the field, and instead of them, burning a part of a field down to the ground, but just moving. It's a really simple way of having cattle move around, strengthening the roots of that grass, and it becomes a carbon sink. So we are very focused on spending money to research. We're working with Arizona State University at the moment on research regarding, can we get to carbon neutral beef production? That is our vision. So a lot of things going on in a lot of different areas of our business.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of those successes and what you're trying out and testing. It's really fascinating to hear how you all are evolving as things are changing. Since you also brought up the idea of waste, we've had a few questions in the chat about both broadly how cities and businesses are handling waste and how we're getting better and growing in that area. And then more specific question about how we're handling waste streams here in Chicago for Angela.
Yeah, I can begin. I am excited to talk about this topic as well. It's important for us, especially since the waste industry is a major source of emissions here in the city of Chicago, and because we have a finite number of years left for the landfilling system in the region, right? And so when this administration, when I arrived at the end of last summer, it was important for us to just launch a comprehensive waste strategy, right? An overhaul of the entire system, and really identifying ways for us to think less about the traditional system, the way that it is set up now, which is, essentially landfilling, putting waste in the trash and then landfilling and then recycling, right? And a number of items that can go into a blue bin, and that's the end of the system, right? And we know that waste has evolved so much over the years, and we have a lot to learn from our partners that are in the circular economy sector, right? And are teaching us a lot about how to close that loop. And so we have since last year, really been learning and understanding where there are the best opportunities for the city of Chicago, and really reframing our waste system as a materials management system, right? Really identifying what the sources of what's in our waste, and where are there opportunities starting at the top, right? Before items come downstream, how can we intervene right at the top? And McDonald's and other corporations have been excellent partners. We've had a number of conversations lately with folks here in the city of Chicago to really understand some of our corporate sustainability partners, to really identify ways to divert food waste and to think about new packaging pilots here in the city of Chicago, which is exciting. So there's a lot of potential partnership opportunities that are brewing in that space. And then beyond that, right, construction and demolition is a big source of waste, a source of waste in our stream. Where are there opportunities for us to think about diverting that, right? Reusing those materials, building a reuse warehouse here in Chicago. We're learning a lot from cities like St. Louis that have done this really well. And so there are a number of strategies. We're actually due to release a report that should be coming out next month that will talk about some of these strategies. Some of them we are ready to implement right away, and other strategies we will continue to work on. But the idea here is that, we have a tremendous opportunity to think about closing that loop, to really incorporate circularity into as a best practice for the city, and to think about where our best opportunities are, particularly with food waste and construction and demolition.
Thank you. Folks should feel free to still weave an answer to that in if you have it, but do want to kind of ask our final question to folks as we get into our last few minutes here, which we want each of our panelists to answer. So thinking about all of our audience members representing themselves as individuals, being parts of organizations, businesses, governments, what can individuals and groups do? What's something actionable that people can do, especially keeping in mind that, some of the strategies and goals that we've talked about today, even if we reach them, might not start to reverse climate change. Is there anything that people can do to get us closer to that goal of reversing some of the damage that we've done as well?
As consumers, we can make so many choices that help reduce our personal carbon footprint. That includes how you get to work. It includes how you get to your groceries. It includes what you eat. It includes recognizing that energy use, which generates emissions, may be coming because of the water that you use, right? I'm telling my children about shorter showers, less hot showers, because the pumping of the water through the system, that's an energy user. The heating of that water is an energy user. So recognizing and being mindful about everything you touch and what's the least intrusive way to get that accomplished.
So I would say, I love everything that Mary said. I think some of the issues we're dealing with are so incredibly complex. We've all talked about infrastructure, right? We've talked about renewable energy, and there are some solutions today, but we know we need more solutions to get to where we need to be. Most of the issues we're dealing with are so big and so complex. I think the number one thing that you can do as a citizen is vote, because I think you need regulations, you need systems behind to create the type of change we really need, and be an educated voter. Know who you're voting for. Know that those people that you're voting for have the same interests in reducing the impacts to climate change that you do, because I think that we need, systematic change to change things. In addition to all the things that Mary said that we need to do every day, that there's still some really huge systematic issues that can be addressed through making sure we have the right people in office.
And I'll also approach this from a policy perspective. I think at least there are a couple of things that are going to be happening here in the city of Chicago. I mentioned the climate action plan, and I think just having a voice and being a part of that conversation is really beneficial for us, just to really understand how we can transform our communities through this process is important. The city of Chicago is also gearing up and has just begun the process for We Will Chicago, which is the first citywide plan, I think, in 80 years. Chloe probably knows better than me, but I think it's 80 years, right? It's a long time. We haven't had a plan for quite some time at a citywide scale. And the hope is that there are sustainability and environment interventions that are weaved within that plan. One of the pillars of that plan is resiliency. And I think that is a process that's ongoing. There are a number of ways where we want to engage folks in that conversation. And we are also gearing up to release some of the work that we're doing with our utility franchise agreement as well, really trying to understand folks' relationship with the energy system here in Chicago so that we can build a better franchise agreement. So I think that there are a number of opportunities. where people can engage with us to talk about priorities. On the state level, I'll have to just acknowledge quickly, the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition is still fighting for CEJA, which would put the state on a pathway to reach 100% renewable by 2050, and also just promoting jobs and economic opportunities, particularly for communities of color throughout the state. So there's an opportunity to get more engaged with that. And then finally, I can't leave this conversation without acknowledging the frontline leaders. There are so many environmental and climate justice organizations throughout Chicago that need our support. There's an opportunity for us just to lift up their work. Chicago has a Chicago Environmental Justice Network, a group of frontline leaders that are just fighting this fight every day, and represent communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change. So there are, opportunities to just support and uplift their work as well.
Well, thank you to all three of our panelists, Mary, Francesca, Angela. You were wonderful today, bringing in just so many important things for us to think about in terms of how we can tackle all of this together as part of our city and part of a global community. And thank you to all of our attendees. If you have more questions, feel free to engage with us on social media, send us email. We will send out the recording of this event and recap, and we hope we'll continue to talk with you, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye all.